The ivory wedding dress was gone. Mabel Hart knew it before she crossed the sewing room. The wooden form stood bare beside the cold window, one pin still caught in its shoulder. The muslin cover lay crumpled on the floor. From downstairs came the scrape of fiddle bows, the clink of supper plates, and her younger sister's laughter. Mabel set down her sewing basket and walked toward the stairs. She had spent 11 months making that dress from the last length of ivory silk their mother had saved. No man had asked her to wear it. No wedding date waited on a calendar. She had made it because she wanted one thing in her life that did not begin with someone else's need. At the bottom of the stairs, the Hart parlor opened before her in a blaze of late afternoon light. Harvest guests crowded the long room. Her father stood by the cider bowl. Grant Mercer had just entered from the yard, broad in a charcoal coat, cold wind still reddening his weathered face. And in the center of them all, Celia wore Mabel's wedding dress. The skirt shone against her slender frame. The hand-stitched flowers Mabel had hidden along the cuffs caught the light as Celia turned toward Grant and spread the ivory silk with both hands. "Well?" Celia asked. "What do you think?" Mabel stopped in the doorway. Celia saw her, and for one bare second guilt crossed her pretty face. Then she lifted her chin. "It fits me better." "Take it off," Mabel said. Her father, Amos Hart, lowered his cup. "Don't ruin the evening over a dress." Grant did not look at Celia's smile. His gaze traveled over the shaped cuff, the fitted waist, and the tiny sprays of wheat worked into the silk. He had stood in Mabel's shop often enough to know the patience in those stitches. "Who made it?" he asked. Celia's smile tightened. "Does that matter?" Grant turned fully away from her. He held one open hand toward Mabel, inviting her into the center of a room that had left her standing at its edge. "It does to me." Celia let the skirt fall. "Mabel helped. I made every stitch," Mabel said. Silence moved through the room faster than gossip. Grant looked at her. "Then she ought to take it off." Amos stepped between the sisters. "Celia only meant to show it. There is no need to shame her before half the county." Mabel stared at the dress. She could picture every evening spent over it after the household slept, every place where her mother's voice had seemed close enough to hear. Celia had not merely borrowed silk. She had stepped into a hope Mabel had never spoken aloud, and displayed it as if the hope had always belonged to the prettier daughter. "No," Mabel said. "She can keep it." Celia blinked. Mabel met her sister's eyes. "I won't marry in something another woman had to steal to feel chosen." She walked back upstairs before anyone could mistake dignity for permission. By the time the fiddle began again, Mabel had packed her shears, chalk, measuring tape, account book, and the silver thimble that had belonged to her mother. She left the bare dress form behind. Amos found her tying the lid on the last wooden box. "What foolishness is this?" "I'm moving my work." "Your work belongs here." Mabel looked around the room she had used since she was 16. She had sewn grain sacks for her father, church dresses for Celia, morning sleeves for neighbors, and coats for men who remembered to thank Amos for the Hart family's fine work. "My work belongs where my name does," she said. The old saddler's shop near the north end of town had stood empty since spring. Its roof leaked over one corner, and the front window needed new putty, but Mrs. Lennox would rent it for $8 a month. Mabel had enough saved for 3 months, provided she did not buy new ivory silk. She carried the first box there before supper. Grant came the next morning. He had left his hat outside, as he always did when he entered her workroom. The gesture had once seemed merely polite. Now Mabel wondered how much kindness could be trusted when it had never been spoken clearly. He found her on a stool scraping old paste from the front glass. "I should have said something sooner," he told her. "About the dress? About you." Her scraper stopped. Grant stood with his hands loose at his sides. He did not move closer. I let a great many quiet visits pass for an answer. They weren't one. Mabel climbed down from the stool. Don't decide you want me because someone else was cruel to me. I didn't. Then don't ask me to believe it today. Pain touched his eyes, but he nodded. What would you have me do? Nothing for me. Make your own choices. Let me make mine. All right, he said. But I am sorry my silence helped them think you could be treated that way. He left without trying to touch her. For the next week, Mabel worked beneath the wide, pale window of the old shop. She set the cutting table where the northern light fell evenly. She rehung the door, patched the roof, and painted the interior cream with help she paid for at the same rate she would have expected for her own labor. Her first customer was Mrs. Rowland, a square-shouldered ranch widow who had spent 20 years accepting dresses made for a narrower woman. Mabel pinned a paper pattern against her. Raise your arm. Mrs. Rowland did. The old sleeve pulled hard beneath her shoulder. That is why every dress you own fights you when you reach for anything, Mabel said. I thought I was built wrong. Cloth is easier to correct than a woman. Mrs. Rowland laughed, then ordered 2 work dresses and 1 for the winter assembly. Others came. A ranch cook who needed room to lift kettles, a storekeeper whose bodice always rode up behind the counter, a young married woman who wanted a wool skirt that could survive a wagon step without making her feel dressed for a barn. Mabel listened to what each woman needed to do, not merely how she wished to appear. Her chalk lines changed with their lives. She was measuring a length of burgundy braid when Celia entered the shop. Her sister wore a blue traveling coat and an expression of practiced concern. People are saying you left home because of me. I left because of me. That sounds very brave. Celia ran one finger along the cutting table. Grant has been asking about you. Mabel kept measuring. He came to the house twice last month to discuss feed with Father, Celia continued. He spent longer talking to you about blanket cloth than he did talking business. I thought he had forgotten which sister was meant to marry well. No sister was promised to him. Celia's mouth sharpened. Do you truly think a man like Grant Mercer looked at you before I gave him a reason to feel sorry for you? The braid slipped half an inch beneath Mabel's fingers. Celia saw it. He noticed the dress before he noticed the woman, she said softly. Mabel rolled the braid around its card. You should leave. I am trying to spare you. No. You are trying to make his attention belong to you again. Color rose in Celia's cheeks. She walked out without another word. The cruelest part was that her accusations stayed. Grant had asked about the dress. He had studied Mabel's work. He had spoken because Celia had humiliated her. Mabel wanted to believe his interest reached further back, but wanting was no proof. That evening Grant came carrying a paper twist of dark green thread from Bozeman. Months earlier, Mabel had mentioned that the local dye lots faded too quickly. He had remembered. Have supper with me Saturday, he said. She looked at the thread in his hand and hated how much the small remembrance moved her. I need to know you are choosing a woman, Grant, not defending a cause. He set the thread on the table. How can I show you? I don't know yet. He absorbed that without argument. Then I will give you room to find out. He left the thread because it had been bought before her refusal and took no promise with him. 3 days later, Amos summoned Grant to the Hart grain store. The winter feed arrangement between them had been settled by handshake in August. Hart wagons would deliver twice a month through February at a favorable price. Without it, Grant would have to send teams 40 miles east over a road that crossed open country and iced early. Amos closed the office door. You have embarrassed Celia enough. Grant remained standing. I did not put her in that dress. You encouraged Mabel's performance. Mabel did not perform. She told the truth. Amos pushed the written price schedule across the counter. If you intend to keep calling at that shop, Hart feed will not go to Mercer Ranch. Grant looked down at the figures. Changing suppliers would cost money, time, and 2 reliable men during the hardest weeks of the year. He folded the schedule once and placed it back beneath Amos's hand. Then I suppose I need another feed man. He did not tell Mabel. The first hard cold arrived in November. Grant took 2 wagons east with his foreman, Will Danner, and 4 ranch hands. The road stayed clear the first day. On the return, a blue wall of cloud rolled down from the mountains before noon. Snow found every gap in their coats. Wind worried the canvas until one tie tore loose. A wagon wheel struck frozen ground at the edge of a wash and cracked 2 spokes. They unloaded half the grain by hand, braced the wheel, and moved through the night at a walking pace. Grant returned with ice in his beard, one glove split at the palm, and exhaustion bending his shoulders. No cattle were lost. No grand rescue followed. The cost appeared in smaller truths. A damaged wagon, a week's wages for extra work, and 6 men whose coats had failed where cold mattered. Will Danner brought the coats to Mabel's shop. Mercer said you might repair these if you have time. Mabel lifted one sleeve. The seam had torn beneath the arm because it had been cut for a man standing still, not a rider reaching across a saddle. Why was he hauling his own feed? She asked. Will hesitated. Because your father canceled the delivery. The room seemed to narrow around her. When? Day after Miss Celia visited you. Mabel set the coat down. Did Grant ask you to tell me? No, ma'am. He told us it was his business. She looked at the pile. Split seams, thin linings, stiffened cuffs. Grant had chosen before he knew she would ever choose him back. He had paid for it without carrying the price to her door. Mabel measured each coat, opened the failed seams, and cut gussets from stout wool. She lined the cuffs where wind entered and reinforced the shoulders without turning working men into bundled statues. Then she wrote Grant Mercer an honest invoice. He came 2 days later, still pale beneath his weathered skin. You are billing me? He asked. Of course. One corner of his mouth lifted. Good. He paid every cent. The repaired coats brought more work. Men from the Rowland place wanted the same shoulder cut. A freight driver asked for a storm flap that did not catch on his harness. Mabel hired Nora Bell, a widowed seamstress of 29, for 3 afternoons a week and paid her from the first large order rather than calling the work a favor. By December, the shop smelled of wool, hot starch, beeswax, and snow melting from boots near the stove. Women no longer came only to be made pretty. Families came because Mabel's garments allowed them to move, work, and face winter without surrendering shape or dignity. Amos arrived one morning while Nora was cutting coat lining. He looked at the crowded racks. You have proved your point. I was building a business. Come home. I will tell people the dress was a misunderstanding. Mabel waited. And Grant? She asked. Amos's jaw set. A decent man would not turn sisters against one another. Celia took the dress. You defended her. Grant told the truth. If you continue with him, do not expect Hart customers to be sent here. The account book lay open on Mabel's table. 2 Hart referrals could fill a week's orders. Returning home would give her warmth, security, and the approval she had once worked desperately to earn. She thought of Mrs. Rowland raising her arm without a seam biting her shoulder. She thought of Nora's first paid envelope tucked carefully into a glove. She thought of Grant accepting a longer winter road because respect became worthless if it lasted only while convenient. Then send them where you please, Mabel said. I will not rent belonging from you by the week. Amos left. Mabel's hands shook after the door closed, but she did not call him back. The refusal cost more than pride. By noon, 2 women whose husbands bought grain from Amos canceled their fittings. A third sent word that she would wait until spring. Mabel opened her account book after Nora went home and worked the figures twice. She could pay January rent. She could pay Nora. She could not do both and purchase the heavy charcoal wool Mrs. Rowland had requested for the Conway riding coat order. The Conway ranch had not promised 8 coats yet. They wanted one sample first. Their riders spent 10 hours at a time in the saddle, reaching, roping, and lifting feed. If Mabel's cut held through a week of that work, they would place the larger order. If it failed, the wool would consume nearly all the money she had left. The safer choice was to let Nora go for a month and finish ordinary dresses alone. Mabel found Nora sweeping thread from beneath the cutting table the next morning. "I lost 3 orders yesterday," Mabel said. Nora rested both hands on the broom. "I can manage without wages until you are steadier." "No, Mabel, I know what you meant. Work is not worth less because the owner is frightened." She placed Nora's weekly envelope on the table, then took every remaining dollar of her own savings to the wool merchant. The risk sat beneath her ribs as she cut the first Conway coat. She shaped the back in 3 pieces instead of 1, allowing the cloth to move with a rider's shoulders. She deepened the arm side, added a gusset where Will's old coat had torn, and set the pockets high enough that a saddle horn would not crush their contents. Nora basted, while Mabel fitted the coat on Eli Conway, a tall rider with longer arms than Patience. "Feels loose," he said. "Reach for that shelf." He did. The coat settled across his back without climbing. "Now it does not," Mabel said. The trial lasted 6 days. Eli wore the coat through sleet, a fence repair, and 2 long cattle searches. On the 7th morning, he entered Mabel's shop, laid a mud-streaked sleeve on the table, and raised both arms above his head. Every seam held. "Mrs. Rowland says you name the price," he told her. "I do." "Name it for 8. Mabel gave him the figure she had calculated, including Nora's wages and the cost of the better lining. Eli did not flinch. "Can you have 4 ready before the assembly?" Mabel looked at Nora. Nora looked at the calendar, then nodded. 4, Mabel said. "The rest in January. I won't promise bad work quickly." Eli held out his hand. "That is why Mrs. Rowland sent us here." When the door closed behind him, Nora laughed and pressed both hands to her mouth. Mabel leaned against the cutting table, feeling the room steady around her. The choice had not saved the shop because someone pitied her. It had worked because she understood cloth, bodies, labor, and the value of paying another woman fairly. Grant kept the distance she had requested. He did not appear every evening with invented repairs. He sent business through the front door and questions through ordinary notes. When he needed 6 more coats, he asked when she could deliver, accepted her date, and paid the deposit. Once, near closing, he arrived wearing the old charcoal riding coat she had mended the previous spring. Mabel saw a faded strip of green wool inside the cuff. "Hold still," she said. She turned the sleeve back. The patch had thinned, almost transparent. "I repaired that months ago. Why keep the coat?" "It still serves." "That patch does not." Grant's gaze rested on her bent head. "It was the first thing you ever made for me." She glanced up. "That is not a reason to freeze." "No, but it is a reason I never forgot who made it." The old wound opened, then changed shape. He had noticed before the ivory dress. He had remembered a hidden patch no one else could see. He had liked what her hands made because they carried her thought, her patience, and her care, not because the work could stand in place of the woman. Mabel cut a fresh patch. "You will wait while I replace it." "Is that an invitation?" "It is an instruction." "Those are becoming my favorite kind." He sat near the stove while she worked. They spoke of cattle prices, Nora's growing skill, and a row of cottonwoods Grant intended to plant near the ranch house in spring. He did not ask whether she imagined herself beneath them. He allowed the future to remain a door she could open herself. The winter assembly was held in the Pale County Hall on the first Saturday after Christmas. Snow reflected blue-white light through the tall windows, pine branches framed the musicians' platform, and the polished floor shone beneath 100 boots. Mabel arrived in a warm cream dress with burgundy embroidery at the cuffs and hem. She had cut it for her own full figure, room in the shoulders, a clean line over her broad waist, and a skirt that moved when she did. It did not imitate Celia, it did not apologize for Mabel. Around the hall her work was already moving. Mrs. Rowland lifted both arms to greet her without a seam pulling. 3 Mercer riders wore charcoal coats with wind flaps that lay flat. Nora wore a plum dress she had cut herself beneath Mabel's eye. Mrs. Rowland drew Mabel aside. "The Conway Ranch wants 8 riding coats. I told them you will quote your own price. You did not promise a delivery date. I have learned not to bargain with the woman holding the chalk." Mabel smiled. The rent for January was already paid. The new order would carry Nora's wages into spring. Across the room, Celia stood in the ivory dress. She had removed the train and altered the neckline, but Mabel recognized every flower. Celia was beautiful. Men noticed. Women admired the silk. For the first time, Mabel felt no need to make either fact smaller. Grant entered a moment later. Celia turned toward him by old instinct. He greeted Amos, he nodded to Celia, then he crossed the floor to Mabel. He stopped at a respectful distance and held out his hand. "May I have this dance?" The room did not become silent. Fiddles played, boots moved, conversations continued. Yet Mabel could feel attention bending toward them. Grant waited without rescue in his face. He had given up money, ease, and safety before he knew whether her answer would ever be yes. He had respected her no without turning cold. He had brought her business and paid the bill. Most of all, he had seen her before the room told him to look. Mabel placed her hand in his. "One dance." His fingers closed gently around hers. "Then I will earn the second." He did not dance like a polished town gentleman. He counted beneath his breath during the first turn and nearly guided them into Mrs. Rowland. Mabel laughed, corrected his hand, and led him cleanly through the next figure. "You are better at following than people suppose," she said. Only when the woman leading knows where she is going. When the music ended, Celia approached them. Her expression was composed, but hurt lived beneath it. "You could have had anyone." Grant looked at her without cruelty. "No." Then he turned back to Mabel, not as a performance for the hall, but because their conversation had not finished. Celia's face changed. For years, she had believed being chosen meant every other woman must lose. Grant's answer gave her no contest to win. Mabel did not ask for another dance immediately. She crossed the hall to discuss the Conway order, named her price, and secured half in advance. When she returned, Grant was waiting beside the window. "You earned the second," she said. This time he did not count aloud. Near the end of the evening, Amos found Mabel by the cloakroom. "I thought Celia needed looking after," he said. "And you thought I did not." "You never seemed to." Mabel fastened her cloak. "That is not the same as not needing anyone to see me." He stared at the floorboards. An apology did not come easily to him, and the one he finally offered was incomplete. "I was wrong about the shop." "Yes." He looked up, surprised that she did not rush to make his admission comfortable. "Can I come see it?" he asked. "You may come as a customer." It was not forgiveness. It was a door, opened only as far as Mabel chose. The courtship lasted through the rest of winter. Grant came on Thursdays after the shop closed. Sometimes he brought coffee beans, sometimes he brought nothing, and listened while Mabel balanced accounts. He learned to ask before moving bolts of cloth. She learned that his silences were not empty when he had already spoken through action. Celia did not become gentle overnight. She visited rarely. In March, however, she entered the shop carrying their mother's silver thimble. I found it caught in the old dress lining, she said. Mabel took it from her palm. This was yours, Celia said. Yes. No embrace followed. Celia looked around the bright shop, at Nora's cutting table and the rack of finished orders. I did not know you wanted all this. You never asked. Celia nodded once. It was a small beginning, and Mabel accepted it only as that. In April, Grant arrived while Mabel was folding a length of warm ivory silk. He studied it for a long moment. Are you ever going to make another wedding dress? Maybe. Would you make one for a woman marrying a cattleman? Mabel kept folding. Depends on the cattleman. He is stubborn. I noticed. He loves her. Her hands became still. Grant did not reach for her. He loved her before he understood that quiet was not courage. He will spend the rest of his life trying not to confuse the two again. She noticed that too, Mabel said. Only then did he ask. Only then did she say yes. They married beneath the new leaves of the cottonwoods at Mercer Ranch. Mabel wore a dress of warm ivory with burgundy wheat at the cuffs, shaped for the body she had never needed to trade for love. Grant wore the repaired charcoal coat until she ordered him to remove it before the sun made him faint. The shop in town remained Mabel's. Nora became her full partner the following year. Grant built a cutting table in the ranch house for the evenings Mabel chose to work at home, but he never called the work a hobby and never entered the room without knocking. Before the wedding, he had watched her finish the last seam and asked one cautious question. Did you put pockets in this one? Mabel slid one hand into the skirt, then the other. 2. Why 2? She looked at the man who had learned that choosing her meant respecting everything she had already chosen for herself. 1 for what was mine before you, she said, and 1 for what we build together.